Imagine a town the size of a small country, with no traffic lights, no malls, and barely any neighbors. Just grass, mountains, and nearly 20,000 head of cattle. This is Douglas Lake Ranch in British Columbia, often called Canada's largest working cattle ranch. From the air, it looks endless. Rolling hills, blue lakes, dirt roads that vanish into the horizon. On paper, it's even crazier. Hundreds of thousands of acres of deeded land, and well over 1 million when you count government grazing leases. But here's the twist. This old-school cowboy empire isn't owned by some rugged Canadian cattle baron. It's owned by an American sports billionaire tied to Walmart money. So, how do you actually run something this massive? Why are local anglers and ranch hands fighting over its fences and lakes? And is this the last stronghold of the real Canadian cowboy? To find Douglas Lake Ranch, you don't look for a town. You look for empty space. We're in south-central British Columbia, in the Nicola Valley, tucked between the cities of Merritt and Kamloops. On a map, it looks like a patch of rangeland. In reality, it's a land base so big it can swallow entire cities and still have room for more. The core of Douglas Lake is roughly 500,000 acres of private deeded land. Then you stack on huge crown grazing leases, public land the ranch is allowed to use, and suddenly you're talking about over 1.5 to 1.8 million acres under its management. To put that in perspective, this one ranch controls an area bigger than some small countries and far larger than many national parks. And it's not just one block of land. Douglas Lake is a web of divisions. Home Ranch near Douglas Lake itself, plus places like Quilchena, Alkali Lake, Risque Creek, even the legendary Gang Ranch. It's less like a ranch and more like a quiet, four-legged empire. Douglas Lake didn't start as an empire. It started as a gamble on grass. In the 1870s, a man named John Douglas Sr. set up a modest homestead on the shores of Douglas Lake. Back then, this was still frontier country. Gold rush traffic fading, railroads creeping west, and hungry mining towns popping up across BC. By the 1880s, a group of investors saw an opportunity. The brand new Canadian Pacific Railway was about to connect coast to coast. Trains meant people, people meant beef. They formed the Douglas Lake Cattle Company and began doing something ruthless but smart. Whenever smaller ranchers struggled through harsh winters or low prices, Douglas Lake quietly bought them out. Year after year, the land base grew. Through the early 1900s, the ranch passed through the hands of powerful owners, bankers, business families, and eventually the Woodward retail dynasty. Each era added more land, more cattle, more influence. There was even a point when another outfit, the Gang Ranch, was considered bigger. But Douglas Lake outlasted the competition and later turned around and bought Gang Ranch too. From a lakeside homestead to a corporate cattle machine. That's the origin story. Running Douglas Lake isn't like running a ranch. It's like running a moving city of cattle. At any given time, you're looking at around 20,000 head in the system, mainly Hereford and Angus. There are thousands of mother cows, replacement heifers, bulls, and a tidal wave of calves born every spring. The year works like a migration. In late spring, as the snow melts off the hills, crews start trailing cattle up onto Crown Range, millions of acres of high country grass. From May to about October, the herd spreads out across ridges, timber, and valleys, following water and grazing plans that are mapped like military operations. Then fall hits. Snow threatens, grass slows down, and everything has to come home. Cattle are gathered, sorted, weaned, and moved back to ranch-owned grasslands and wintering areas. This is where another monster operation kicks in: feed. Douglas Lake farms thousands of acres of irrigated fields to grow hay and silage, tens of thousands of tons a year. Giant pivots sweep over fields of barley and alfalfa. So there's enough feed to keep the herd going through long BC winters. There's technology everywhere: GPS, irrigation controls, range monitoring, trucks, tractors, sometimes even helicopters to spot cattle in brutal terrain. But here's what most people miss. For all the modern gear, the system still falls apart without one old-school ingredient: a cowboy on a good horse. Someone has to ride those ranges, check those calves, doctor sick animals, and move the herd in places no pickup truck is getting into. At Douglas Lake, the computers help. The horses still run the show. If Douglas Lake is an empire, its citizens aren't politicians or CEOs. They're cowboys. The ranch supports roughly 100+ people when you count full-time staff and seasonal help. Many are second or third generation, kids who grew up in a saddle and never really left. At headquarters, it feels less like a workplace and more like a tiny, hidden town. There are company houses lined up along gravel roads. Kids catch the school bus or walk to a small local school. There's a church, a hall, and at one point, a general store where you could grab mail, coffee, and gossip in the same 5 minutes. Days start early. Before the sun hits the hills, horses are caught, saddled, and warmed up in the half-light. Crews split off, some riding out to check yearlings, others branding, sorting, or doctoring. In summer, they might not see pavement for days. Then there's the horse program. Douglas Lake breeds and trains its own quarter horses, athletic, cow-smart animals, used for everything from cutting to roping. Some have gone on to win serious awards and championships, but for the crew, that's not the point. Out here, your horse is your partner, your transportation, and sometimes your only co-worker for 8 hours. For a lot of riders across Canada, landing a spot at Douglas Lake is like making the NHL of ranch work. Tough, demanding, and unforgettable. On the surface, Douglas Lake looks like a pure cowboy outfit, but behind the scenes, it's a stack of businesses. Yes, cattle are the backbone. A big cow-calf operation, yearlings, and all the farming needed to feed them. That alone is a serious enterprise. But then you add the side hustles that are anything but small. Scattered across the ranch are carefully managed lakes stocked for trophy fly fishing. Access doesn't come cheap. Anglers book packages at places like Salmon Lake Resort or exclusive cabins and camps. There's the historic Quilchena Hotel near Nicola Lake, a 1908-era country hotel that feels like you stepped into an old ranching film, now catering to tourists, weddings, and events. So now the ranch isn't just selling beef, it's selling an entire Western experience. And over all of this sits one name: Stan Kroenke, the same billionaire who owns major sports franchises in the NFL, NBA, NHL, and Premier League, also owns this quiet Canadian cattle kingdom. Married into the Walton family, connected to Walmart wealth, he represents the new kind of ranch owner, where global capital meets local cowboy culture. Douglas Lake might look old-fashioned on the ground. On the balance sheet, it's anything but. For all its beauty, Douglas Lake isn't just sunsets and cattle drives. It's also one of the most controversial ranches in BC. The flashpoint? Access. In British Columbia, lakes and fish are considered public resources, but the land around those lakes can be privately owned. Douglas Lake controls key strips of land around certain lakes, like Minnie and Stony, then locks the gates. To anglers and local residents, that feels like a billionaire, blocking them from what should be everyone's water. For the ranch, it's about protecting property, limiting liability, and controlling a valuable recreation business. The fight got serious. For years, the Nicola Valley Fish and Game Club battled the ranch in court, arguing that historic public roads and rights of way should allow people to reach the lakes. In 2018, a BC Supreme Court judge largely agreed, calling the ranch's actions a substantial and unreasonable interference with public access. But the story didn't end there. Douglas Lake appealed, and in 2021, the BC Court of Appeal overturned much of that ruling, siding with the ranch and reinforcing its control over the access points. So now the question hangs in the air. Are giant private ranches like Douglas Lake protectors of open land and wildlife, or gatekeepers standing between the public and the outdoors? So what happens next for Douglas Lake and for the people who ride its ranges? Ranching in Canada is under pressure. Land prices are exploding. Droughts, wildfires, and extreme weather make every grazing season a gamble. Meat prices go up and down, but fuel, feed, and labor almost always go up. Big outfits like Douglas Lake survive partly because of scale. They can spread risk across multiple divisions, crops, and revenue streams. They're experimenting with range monitoring, better water systems, and sustainability programs that reward them for taking care of grass and wildlife. But there's something you can't scale with money: cowboys. A lot of the old hands are aging out. Younger people have options: city jobs, remote work, careers that don't involve snow, dust, and a sore back. For some, the romance of ranch life still calls. For others, it's just too hard, too far, too uncertain. That's the real question. Will places like Douglas Lake be the blueprint for future mega ranches, or the last strongholds of a fading way of life? If you want more stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and share this video.